Hello, welcome back to my haunted library. It's Regina. Hope everyone's doing well. Today I'm doing something a little different. I've been watching a lot of movies in this isolation period, and something I do like to do with my films is kind of categorize them. So I've been binging on, or when I say categorize, like putting them together in like a theme, like I'll watch a bunch of vampire movies and then I'll watch a bunch of ghost stories. And these are 10 horror movies about writers. So I don't think it will surprise anyone that a lot of the stories on this list are from a Stephen King novel or short story, or Stephen King had something to do with it. This is a common theme in a lot of his work, as you probably know. I mean, the big ones come to mind: Misery, The Shining, but there are a few others on here that kind of surprised me. So I'm not putting these in any kind of order. It's not like top 10, so I'm not rating them, but I'll tell about the film and I'll tell you what I think. So I'm just kind of doing this casually. And if you have any suggestions, please put them in the comments below. So the first film on my list is Images by Robert Altman. Now, I didn't write down the date it was produced, but I'm guessing it was around the late 60s, early 70s, so I'm going to put the date right there. And I'm a big Altman fan, but I've never seen this movie. And it's one of his earlier ones, but it's really, really good. And it's not exactly what I would consider like a horror film, but it's definitely like a psychological horror film. It's not, if you're looking for big kill scenes and this kind of thing, you won't find them in this film. But if you're looking for like a major mind twist, definitely will find it in this film. In fact, of all the movies that I've watched on movies about writers, this one got under my skin more than some of the other ones. So Images is about a children's author, and she writes, there's narrative of this prose that she's writing. Prose itself is really stunning. So she believes that her husband is having an affair, and she's kind of in this state of paranoia. And while holidaying in Ireland, her mental state becomes increasingly unstable, resulting in paranoia, hallucinations, and visions of a doppelganger. So the setting of this film is stunning, from the interiors of these homes that she and her husband live in. He's an artist, like an art photographer. And they're very urbane. And this little village, or this countryside in Ireland, is something out of a dream. And I mean, you have to see this film to believe this place. It's just incredible. So the film has this kind of dreamlike setting and some really creepy things, like, and it did kind of have like a David Lynch feel to it as well. But where you, like, not to give too much away, but at the beginning of the film, she's talking to like a girlfriend on the phone, and the girl's blabbing about this, kind of mundane stuff. And then all of a sudden a different voice cuts in, and it's like, do you know where your husband is? He's with another woman. And she's like this, and then it goes back to her girlfriend talking. And it's so subtle that there were definitely times during the film that we backed it up and rewatched it. I watched this on Amazon Prime. And what was that? We back up the film and watch it again. So if you like a kind of slow burn, artsy, creepy kind of scary movie, highly recommend Images by Robert Altman. It was really good, and I'm glad that looking at this list allowed me to discover that film, because I'd never seen it. One of his other early films, Three Women, has that kind of feel too. There's something always about his films that are very disturbing. So I would say this film is more a disturbing type of psychological horror than straight out like screams and that kind of thing. So the next film on the list is very different from Images, and that is In the Mouth of Madness, which was a film that came out in 1994 by John Carpenter, and it stars Sam Neill, and Charlton Heston has a little cameo role in it. It's really good. It's about this author. Well, it's actually about, Sam Neill plays a character who is like an insurance investigator, and at the beginning he's in a mental hospital, and he's like in a straitjacket. So something really horrible happened to him, and then he tells the story. So Sutter Kane is kind of like a mythical, bigger than life writer, kind of like a Stephen King. He lives in New England, or like a Clive Barker, who wrote this book, and it's driving everyone insane and into these like they become murderers. And there's this great scene where Sam Neill's in a cafe, and the Sutter Kane's agent comes like out of this bookstore and has an axe and just, tries to kill him through the window of the cafe. It's a really great scene. The movie is really out there. I mean, it's crazy. It's a lot of fun, and highly recommend it if you like very like bold horror. It's good acting. It gets into almost like a Lovecraft kind of world, a mythical world, or like a Clive Barker world, where it's like this town has taken on its own kind of life with characters from the book. And I don't want to give too much away. A lot of you guys have probably already seen that movie, but it's definitely a fun horror film. And if you like John Carpenter, you'll really like it. All right, so the next movie on the list is The Dark Half. Around the same time, 1993, based on a Stephen King novel, directed by George Romero, starring Timothy Hutton and Amy Madigan and a few other people. So I could see, I mean, it was funny because a lot of times the movies I really love have very low ratings on Rotten Tomatoes. It just, I don't know, just saying. And I think I kind of understand that maybe some audiences today would find this movie a little slow, which is a word I don't like, but I think there could be that, but I found it fascinating. Timothy Hutton's really good in it. It's all about this doubling, and I'm really curious to read the novel. But so Timothy Hutton is born with a twin inside him, and in a really crazy scene. Well, as a child, he's getting headaches, and the twin is inside his brain in the form of like an eye. So and this actually happened to a friend of mine. Totally true story. Very good friend of mine had to get surgery, and they found her twin in her uterus, implanted there, and it was a very small little twin, and it had teeth and hair. I mean, that would make a great horror film, except Stephen King, or book, except Stephen King already did it. But I still think that there's room for exploration with this theme, because it's really, really crazy. But so that's a true story. She has the pictures to prove it, the ultrasound pictures. So it's kind of going back to that very classic Jekyll and Hyde theme, where you've got Timothy Hutton, who's this like really nice guy. He's got the nice wife. He's got these two little twin babies that really steal the movie. I mean, they're so cute. And kind of like how you imagine maybe Stephen King's got his wife Tabitha, and he's got his kids, and he's living in Maine, and he's doing all the right things, but inside is this demon. So he writes under this pseudonym, George Stark, and that guy is completely opposite of him. He's the Mr. Hyde to his Dr. Jekyll, and he's totally evil. But his books are the ones that are selling. So when this guy threatens to expose the author as being George Stark, he comes out and makes a display and admits that, I am George Stark. So they kill him off in this publicity stunt where they bury him, and then George Stark really comes back and enacts all of his vengeance because he doesn't want to die. It's really great. I loved it. There's also some weird thing with like sparrows. I think maybe that part, not having read the book, that part in the movie was a little bit lost. And Julie Harris has a nice little cameo in this too, as a eccentric college professor who smokes a pipe. She's wonderful. But maybe in the book, the sparrows are more explained. But yeah, I've never read the book, never seen the movie, and I loved it. I thought it was great. So next on the list is a film that's new for me that I really loved, and that's 1408, a 2007 film starring John Cusack and Samuel L. Jackson, based on a short story by Stephen King. If you read his book on writing, which I have and I highly recommend it, he writes about his own personal experiences dealing with some of his demons when he was doing drugs and alcohol, and his wife finally, got fed up with him and he changed his ways. So all of these movies kind of deal with that theme in some way of the isolated author, the demons inside your head. And anyone who's a writer, I know I've dealt with this, facing the blank page, the self-doubt, the reading back what you've written, and the horror of thinking it's crap and all of that stuff. I mean, and also he gets into like the successful, something I don't have a problem with, but the successful writer's dilemma of having to meet the deadlines, of having to please the audience. Timothy Hutton's character as the nice guy author wants people to like his nice books, but they all go with these crappy genre books that he writes under the pseudonym. He hates this guy, but that's what sells. So there's that. I mean, I don't know how many of you guys are writers out there, but there is always that, or any kind of art that you're doing, there's always that, art versus commerce kind of fight going on. And, well, maybe I should write, people don't like horror as much as romances. I should write romances. Well, I don't like romances. All of the stuff that goes on that Stephen King taps into beautifully in all of these stories. So I really liked that. So 1408, I really loved too. And this is a real tour de force for the actor John Cusack, who I adore. So if you're a big John Cusack fan, you probably already know this movie. You've probably seen it many times, but I hadn't, and I really loved it. So Cusack plays a guy named Mike Enslin, who is a paranormal investigative author. He goes around to haunted houses and rents the rooms and or hotels and writes books about them. But he's a complete skeptic. He doesn't believe it. So he goes to this hotel in New York and stays in this room, 1408. And Samuel L. Jackson is the manager of the hotel, and he tells him, "You're not going to survive an hour in this room. I'm just warning you. Bad things are going to happen. People have killed themselves. People have died. You won't last an hour." And he's like, "Come on, give me a break." So he checks into the hotel and all hell breaks loose. And it's really basically his character in this room for the whole time. And that's a hard thing to pull off, but it really worked. All right, so next up, Secret Window, a 2004 American psychological thriller starring Johnny Depp and John Turturro, based on a novella, Secret Window, Secret Garden by Stephen King. So this movie, again, taps into the fears of a writer. Johnny Depp is staying in this remote cabin in the woods. He's going through a divorce. He's his writer's block. He's trying not to drink. He's trying not to smoke. He's kind of climbing the walls, trying to come up with a new story, when he is visited by this weird guy, played by John Turturro, who claims, he's got this thick Southern accent, he claims that Johnny Depp's character stole his story and plagiarized. Now, there is a little bit of a backstory where he actually did plagiarize a story and got called out for it. So he's got this kind of like sin on his soul in a way that makes him very paranoid. And I won't say much about it because it really does rely on some heavy twists. I really enjoyed this, and I just watched Johnny Depp, do just about anything. And he's very handsome in this film, even though he's like, got his hair messed up and wearing a bathrobe the whole time. Still very, very handsome. All right, next on the list, and again, these are not in any particular order, is Tenebrae. I'm not sure if I'm saying it correctly. I think they said Tenebrae in the dubbed version I watched. A 1982 Italian giallo film written and directed by Dario Argento. This film I actually had seen before, but I'd kind of forgotten that I'd seen it because I think it had a different name when I watched it before, which sometimes happens with foreign films. But this I watched online, and it was kind of like a bad dubbed version of it. And I think some of it was cut, like some of the maybe the more graphic kill scenes were cut, but I still really enjoyed it. Anything Dario Argento produces is interesting. I've always find his films interesting. I mean, Suspiria is one of my favorite horror films of all time. So this film is about a serial killer who is inspired by this author's book. So this isn't exactly new territory, but it's the style in which Argento does his films and the incredible soundtrack that just makes them so unique and so interesting. And it's funny because there's films, there's like these long kind of scenes that, it's probably better to watch it in Italian with subtitles, but the dubs always seem really kind of badly done. And then they go into these elaborate kill scenes and you're just riveted because of the music and just they're very gory, they're very graphic, and the women in his films are always really beautiful. And this one has a twist, and actually the twist got me. It really got me. I didn't see it coming, and that was a satisfying film because of that and for all of the other stylish reasons. So I definitely enjoyed Tenebrae. All right, next up, this film, of all of the films on the list, this one scared me the most. And that's Sinister, a 2012 supernatural horror film directed and co-written by Scott Derrickson, starring Ethan Hawke. So the plot revolves around fictional true crime writer Ellison Oswalt, whose discovery in the attic of his new house of a box of home movies depicting grisly murders puts his family in danger. Let me tell you, this film scared me. It's been a long time since I've gotten those kinds of chills and those tingles. That's high praise, because it's hard to scare me. A lot of these films that I watched before, like Misery and The Shining, of course, scared me when I watched them then. But it's fun to actually experience a film I've never seen and get really scared. This film scared me. I mean, probably the last film that really scared me on that level was Hereditary, which really, really scared me. This film scared me in the same way because just through these home movies, it's done really well. Ethan Hawke plays a character who's like, again, the obsessed artist. And it's funny because it's usually, well, except for Images, it's like male writers with these really super patient, nice wives, like these supportive spouses who are just like, can't we have a normal life with the kids? Why do we have to move into the house where there was a family murdered and all this stuff? But Ethan Hawke's character wants to have that hit. He had a one-hit wonder book where he really hit it big, and now he's chasing that dragon, and he doesn't want to work editing textbooks, and I can't blame him for that. So the pressure, again, to have this kind of success is blinding him to the danger that he's putting himself and his family in. And the scenes of these murders that are depicted on these home movies are really, really scary. Like, they freaked me out. I got disturbed. I got tingles and chills. So if you don't know this movie and you like movies that are really scary, I would check this out. And if it doesn't scare you, don't get mad. Maybe I'm just overly sensitive. All right, so we have 3 to go. So next on the list is something that may not really be considered a horror film, but I felt like it qualified. And that's Barton Fink, a 1991 American independent period psychological thriller film, written, produced, directed by the Coen brothers, and it's set in 1941. It stars John Turturro in the title role of a young New York City playwright who is hired to write scripts for a film studio in Hollywood, and John Goodman as Charlie Meadows, the insurance salesman who lives next door at the rundown Hotel Earl. Okay. The Coen brothers are great filmmakers, and I have not loved every single movie that they've made. Fargo was wonderful. Sometimes I find their work to be very kind of cold and nihilistic, which I'm sure that they know that people consider them cold and nihilistic because they make jokes about it. But they're geniuses. I mean, what can I say? Barton Fink really scared me, especially the John Goodman character. And he's such a good actor. And he plays this really highly disturbed guy. And the film does go into a supernatural place. And it's really, I guess, a metaphor for the artist coming to grips with Hollywood and what that does to one's soul. And it's a wonderful kind of Faustian tale about, selling your soul to Hollywood and those who resist that call, what happens. And the Hotel Earl is its own kind of demonic hellhole, and it's wonderful. And like I said, John Goodman's character is stupendous. So definitely recommend Barton Fink for, like I said, it's not exactly a horror film, but it's definitely like a psychological thriller, absurd. I would say, to me, it's horror. If it scares me, it's horror. So definitely love Barton Fink. All right, coming down to the last two, and you can probably guess what they are. The Shining, a 1980 psychological horror film produced and directed by Stanley Kubrick. The film is based on Stephen King's 1977 novel and stars Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, Scatman Crothers, and Danny Lloyd. The film's central character is Jack Torrance Nicholson, an aspiring writer and recovering alcoholic who accepts a position as the off-screen caretaker of the isolated Overlook Hotel in the Colorado Rockies. And we all kind of know what happens because most of us have seen this movie at least, or read the book, or both. So The Shining is definitely one of my favorite movies. Now I have to say, I saw this movie when it first came out when I was a teenager, and I did not like it because it was so different from the book. And I remember going to see it with my sister and her ex-husband. At the time was her husband, but I was very scared by it, very disturbed by it, and it really bothered me for a lot of reasons I really don't want to go into. There was some of the reflection of what was happening in the film I was dealing with in real life in my family situation. So I think that's why that I had such a negative reaction to The Shining when I first saw it. It was too traumatizing. That's all I have to say. Later, of course, I've revisited many times, and I think it's a masterpiece, and I love it. And every few years, especially, like we didn't have a good period of snow here in Pennsylvania. No snowstorms. I think we had like one day with some like flurries, and that's it. But usually, if I'm snowed in, it's nothing I like more than to get a little vino out and watch The Shining. So, The Shining, even though the fact that Jack is a writer is not really the central, I would say, focus of the film or the book. It does get into the writer's demons. And of course, in the infamous scene where he's at the typewriter and writes out the sheets of all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And then Shelley Duvall, the wife, is seeing all of these papers. I mean, it's just like brilliantly done. And I think that what this movie taps into is this idea that a lot of creative people struggle with, especially writers, where it's like, oh, if I can just isolate myself. And I've done this too. I've taken my retreats at my little cabin in the woods, which I missed this year because of COVID-19, but I will do it again as soon as I can. So I'm just no internet, no distractions. It's going to be me and my typewriter or my laptop or whatever, or my notebook. And then you're there, and it's just you dealing with yourself and your inner demons, and all kinds of horrible things can happen. It's really a great setup for any kind of psychological horror film or story. And I just reread The Shining last year and really enjoyed it. So yeah, definite classic. So the last film on the list, and I didn't do these in order, but I have to say this is probably the best, in my opinion, of any film about a writer, and that's Misery, again, based on a Stephen King novel that came out, the movie came out in 1990, the book came out in 1987, and it stars James Caan and Kathy Bates and other people that are wonderful, like Lauren Bacall, Richard Farnsworth, Frances Sternhagen. And it's about a psychotic fan who holds an author captive and forces him to write her stories. Again, we have the successful author writing the stuff he doesn't want to write. Misery, this kind of gothic historical romance novel series that are super popular, but he wants to write his own fiction. He wants to write literary fiction. He wants to break away from that trap and finally write the book he wants to write, but he's being held captive by his psychotic fan. And it's wonderful. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. So it's a great book. And I think this is one time where I have to say the movie is almost like better than the book, because the movie is so well crafted. Rob Reiner did an amazing job on it. Incredible acting. Kathy Bates definitely deserved the Oscar for that performance. And I remember going to see this in the movie theater with my husband when we lived in New York. And I think we went out on Christmas Eve and went out to dinner and saw this movie. It's like a Christmas movie. And I absolutely loved it. And it became like a favorite of mine. And I feel like I want to reread the book because just thinking about this movie really got me excited again. So, like I said, lots of stuff here by Stephen King, but not all. This is fun territory to explore the writer's journey, and it almost has to be psychological because of all this stuff that happens when you sit down to write and kind of facing those demons. So that is my list of 10 horror films about writers. Please, if you have any suggestions, put them in the comments below, or let me know if you've watched any of these movies, if you like them, what you thought, and I'd love to hear from you. So hope you guys are staying safe. I'll see you next time in my haunted library. Bye.